Hi everyone, another episode here of Talk Data to Me. Joining me is Moloko Komane, head of department at business advisory at MultiChoice Group. Moloko, how are you doing? So great to have you on the show.
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me, Craig. How are you?
Yeah, I'm always good, thank you. Looking forward to this conversation. I've got a whole bunch lined up for the rest of the week. Just trying to get back, I think, into the zone of doing these podcasts and interviews and everything. So this is the second one I'm doing in this new series, Talk Data to Me. And we're going to be talking about building an insights-driven organization. Maybe just for the people that don't know you, which I don't think is too many people, maybe just a bit of a brief introduction. And I think also head of department for business advisory is not a job title that comes up a lot. So maybe just a bit of an explanation into what it is that you do at the MultiChoice Group.
Oh, great. Head of business advisory is actually business advisory in terms of using insights to advise the business. So it sits in the data department. It's called the Center of Information and Insights, where it's literally the entire department for group. My department look after insights and analytics for 48 countries that MultiChoice has got presence in. Basically giving them information and insights that they need. Yes.
Okay, that's a good, nice remit, 48 countries to look after.
It is, it's a big portfolio.
Absolutely, cool. All right, so let's then talk about insights-driven organization. I think so much conversation is had around being a data-driven organization, being data-centric. And while data is kind of the fuel for the insights, not a lot of people really talk about being an insights-driven organization. And I think that's such a critical part because, you know, we've got wonderful teams doing great things with data, you know, modeling, advanced analytics, obviously machine learning is coming in, AI, all those sorts of things, generating these amazing insights, but then they tend not to get utilized across the business. It seems like such a waste. How have you gone about driving this culture of actually using the insights, actionable insights, and putting them to work within the business?
I would say it was a group-wide or company-wide decision that was made, and it's something that everyone has to be involved in it and has to have the buy-in in it. Because for us at MultiChoice, for example, it started with the company deciding that we want to be an insights-led organization. And what they then did is to look at all the elements of the business to say, how do we structure this business in a way that it will be insights-led? So they looked at people, systems, and processes. So they've decided about 2-3 years ago where they said we want MultiChoice to be future fit for the future, for the 4IR. And they employed data and data analysts, and the system we moved to cloud computing. We have this huge Webinium project to actually change our system to enable for insights generation, you know. And then the processes that we took as well, we adopted the agile ways of working that will enable speed in terms of how you generate insights. So it was more a decision that came from the top that we want to be an insights-led organization, put in the budget to purchase everything that is needed to prepare the company to be an insight-led organization. And then the crux of the work, what you touched on to say, sometimes you have data people doing all this great stuff, but no one using them. So there's also that culture, right? Insights-led, it means you change your culture. You start doing things in a different way, where you no longer rely only on gut feel in terms of making business decisions, but you start relying on data. And that also takes getting used to, you know, the customers also, our customers, internal customers, has to get into that point of saying, what does the data tell me before I make a decision? But before they can get there, they need to trust that they can monetize data. So I'm going to digress a bit and speak about understanding the benefit of data in terms of data monetization. We hear that a lot. Data is gold. Data is the new currency. And basically, if you try to put it in simplest terms to say, when you say monetizing data, what do you mean? There's two ways of doing it. The quickest and easiest way is those companies that gather customer information and then sell it. So that's like directly selling data, making revenue out of selling data. But as a business that is not in the business of selling data, how you monetize it means that you use data to increase your revenue or generate new revenue or reduce cost or improve efficiencies. That basically speaks to your bottom line at the end of the day. So monetizing data from my perspective, from MultiChoice perspective, it speaks to that, to how we use data in order to make sure that what we do it's actually going to add value to the customer. And if you add value to the customer, the profit follows. So that was then they're getting used to come from where now the data teams themselves have to sell their product. So if you just generate all this great stuff with data, but the business doesn't see the value of it or doesn't know what they should use it for, it's just going to sit and know and it's going to use it. But when you start linking it to the business strategy to say, this is what you plan to do, if history is anything to go by, this is what the data tells us in terms of why you are here. And then also the data scientists come in to do the forecast and modeling to say, this is where you're going. If you don't like this trajectory, these are the scenarios. You can do this, this will happen. If you do this, this will happen. And the business that's saying, okay, let me take the action that you recommend. And then after taking that action, you come back and do the impact analysis. You use data again to measure the impact of that decision that they've made. Once they start the impact being positive to their business KPI, then they start liking the fact that, okay, there's something here, and then they start asking for more and more and more, and then the demand for this just increases. And you get to a point where you're not sitting with a problem of generating stuff that no one uses, but actually business demanding stuff and really wanting every piece of you.
Yeah. How did you get, because I think a lot of people will probably be quite envious of being in that position where business is really using the insights, they're using the models, the data products, etc., and they see the benefits, and therefore they come back and say, we need more, let's work together. How did you get sort of cross that sort of barrier that I think a lot of people have, where business doesn't necessarily trust the prescriptive or the predictive analytics and go, that's very nice that you've done that, we're still going to do it our way, because if we adopt what you've created and it doesn't work, it then reflects badly on us. How did you kind of get over that hurdle?
The first step was to align the business strategy to the KPIs for the data team. So basically, every business has got their 5-year strategy, 3-year strategy, and then every year they've got what they plan to do in a year. So the first step is looking at what is the business trying to do in a year, and start to look at what can we do to support that business strategy, to have the business implement those priorities that they have for the year, and set up the KPIs for the data team that is linked to the business strategy, right? And so that is the first step for the business to see when you say, this is how I'm going to help you to get there. Yeah. And it's more like, okay, you have my attention. How are you going to help me to get there? And it's that, I'll say there is a part where you need to earn the trust of the business, where the business needs to start relying on data. It's not something that happens overnight. It comes from that, what I've explained, to say you give something, and then at the end, you actually do the impact analysis to show the value. You try to make the impact of data measurable as much as you can, quantifiable in a way. And if possible, link it to revenue, link it to cost saving. And when you start small, or you can start big, but when you start and you start showing the business that this is what I can do and this is how it's going to help you. And when that actually happens and they see that, oh, you said this is how it's going to help me, and look at that, this is how it helped me. So if I use example for a CVM campaign, a customer value management campaign, where you're looking at your customer behavior and you know that in a year we've got seasonality. There's a dip in the year where people are broke, they don't spend in March. There's a spike in the year in December when people spend a lot. So for example, if you know that usually in this period there'll be a dip, customers don't really use our product in this period, but when we unpack the data, we see that the revenue is leaking from this group. Now, this group, this is the reason why they're not actually consuming our services in this period. So perhaps maybe we can do this to incentivize them to use our product in this period. And then you run that campaign to those particular group that you know they're the cause of your revenue decline. And then at the end of that period, at the end of the campaign, you can actually see that compared to last year now, your revenues are better or your customer activity is better. And you can link it to the day you launched that campaign. And when they start seeing that proof, it kind of like they start relying on the data to say, okay, actually, there's something. And then you start building from there. And and then it gets to that point where the business will start saying, I need the data because I need to make the decision and I need to know what the data tells me before I make that decision. But it's a process.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm kind of hearing there's a lot of involvement, constant involvement, rather than saying, here's the data product, go and put it in. It's a CVM use case or whatever it may be. And then the data team goes and does something else. And they never really check back in what the result was. And then it's kind of like, well, was it the data? Was it the insights? Was it the team just doing what the team does? So what I think you're kind of saying there is that there's this constant involvement, checking in, proving, the use case, it did work, and therefore that trust just inherently gets built up.
Precisely. Stakeholder management is key, building relationships with the business. And also, I'll add to say, having some commercial acumen, as a data specialist, it's also important to understand the business as well, the area that you're servicing. So, for example, if you are responsible for generating insights for sales, it's critical to understand the sales world, because when you give insights, you need to give insights that are relevant and they're also actionable. For you to be able to give insights that are relevant, you need to understand that space. Yeah. But also, you're not going to be an expert like a head of sales or somebody who works in that area. So working with the sales team is critical. In CVM as well, it's important to understand the market dynamics. It's in Africa, I always say Africa is a continent, not a country. So there's different market dynamics in different countries. So it's critical that you understand the marketing world and the consumer behavior, but not only in the country where you're sitting, but also in other countries as well, because something that works very well in South Africa might not necessarily work in Nigeria. So that commercial understanding is very important, but also working closely with the people in that country. The country example that I gave, if you're in South Africa, somebody in Nigeria knows Nigeria better than you. They were born there. They are the consumer in Nigeria.
Yeah, totally.
So you rely on them a lot to understand what works for Nigeria. That engagement is critical.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back a little bit as we sort of start to close off, right back to the beginning. You talked about putting the structures in place and the people and all that sort of thing. Maybe you can just share a little bit around the structures that you've got in place for your team and how they integrate with other parts of the business. Because I also think that's an area where I've seen companies get a little bit stuck. Is it a centralized model? Is it decentralized? Do we have analytics people that sit within business environments to understand that context? Maybe you can just share a little bit around how you've structured this for success.
I'll say it's a little bit of both in a way, because it's, when you think about it, centralized is where the team sits together and then they generate insights for the whole organization, but they just sit together. Decentralized is where every business unit have got their own analysts or their own data specialists sitting in silos and doing their own things separately from everyone. So with us, we kind of like centralized, where as one department responsible for giving data across board. But within that department, we've got what we call squads. We've got the sales squads, the CVM squad. So we've got dedicated data engineers and analysts or data scientists looking after one particular area, but belonging to one department. So when I say a bit of best of both, it's actually centralized, but that department is structured in a way that you don't find one person looking after CVM, sales, finance at the same time. We centralize, but our analysts have got opportunity to focus on one area. They're dedicated to one area at a point in time.
Okay, perfect. Good tips. Okay, and in closing, if you could go back, travel back in time and sort of start this journey again, is there anything that you would do differently? Because I think that's the one thing that people always love to hear at the events that we do through podcasts like this, not just the pure success. Oh, well, that seemed like a linear journey to success. But there must have been certain things, if you look back, you go, man, I wish we had done that differently. Any sort of things that you'd change on the way that you can provide?
I'm trying to think at the top of my head.
No, it was just perfect the whole time.
Sure, I wouldn't say I could do it differently, because it wouldn't necessarily be it wasn't in my control. It's more like, when you inherit a team, the instilling that culture of being insights-led and actually driving the analytics-driven culture. It's something that having the right people is critical, So I'm trying to think what I could have done differently, or some of the things that didn't necessarily go very well, So it's I can't think of at the top of my head what I can say we would have done differently, because so far since we've started, it's been quite a good journey that has worked quite well. Where it didn't go well is where we were. I spoke about the systems as well. So we had the people, we had the systems and processes. So where we actually implemented systems at the same time as we are trying to drive the culture, and at the same time as we're trying to deliver for the business. So trying to do everything all at once, it wasn't easy. So what I could have done differently would be more like maybe focus on people and then focus on system and then focus on adding value, instead of trying to do everything all at once, I suppose.
All right, perfect tips. Moloko, thanks for talking data to me. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Craig, for having me.
No worries.